When Marcus walked into the country's most prestigious agricultural auction house, the elite crowd sneered at his worn overalls and muddy boots. Little did they know that what he carried inside that weathered wooden box would leave them speechless and forever change how they viewed heritage farming. The Henderson Farm stood as a testament to time itself, nestled in the rolling hills of Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, where 5 generations of farmers had worked the same soil since the Civil War. Marcus Henderson, now the sole keeper of this legacy, wasn't just any farmer. He was the last of a dying breed who understood that true farming was an art passed down through bloodlines, not learned from textbooks or corporate manuals. Every morning, as the sun painted the valley in hues of gold, Marcus would stand on his porch, coffee in hand, surveying the land that had shaped his family's destiny. The ancient oak trees that lined his property had witnessed the triumphs and tribulations of each Henderson generation, their branches heavy with stories of perseverance and unwavering dedication. Unlike the sprawling corporate farms that increasingly encroached upon the valley with their massive machinery and chemical-dependent methods, the Henderson Farm remained steadfast in its traditional approaches. Marcus used techniques handed down from father to son, refined through generations of trial and error. His grandfather always said, "The land speaks to those who listen," and Marcus had learned to hear its whispers. The farm wasn't the largest in the region, far from it. Its modest 200 acres paled in comparison to the 1,000-acre operations that surrounded it. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in soul. Every inch of the Henderson land had been cultivated with care, respect, and an understanding that farming wasn't just about harvest yields. It was about maintaining a sacred connection between man and earth. Marcus's hands told their own story, calloused and weathered from years of working the soil. His face, tanned and lined from countless hours under the sun, carried the same determined expression that old photographs showed on his ancestors' faces. In a world obsessed with progress and profit, he remained committed to the old ways, not out of stubbornness, but out of deep respect for the wisdom his family had accumulated over generations. The farm's barn, built by his great-grandfather in 1887, still stood proud despite its age. Inside, alongside modern tools, hung ancient farming implements that told the story of agricultural evolution. Each tool had its own history, its own purpose, passed down through the years, along with the knowledge of when and how to use them. Marcus often found himself running his hands over the worn wooden handles, feeling the grooves left by his ancestors' grip, drawing strength from their enduring spirit. But times were changing rapidly. The valley that had once been a patchwork of family farms was slowly transforming into a landscape dominated by industrial agriculture. Many of Marcus's neighbors had sold their land to large corporations, unable to resist the allure of substantial payouts and the promise of an easier life. Yet Marcus held firm, knowing that his farm represented something more valuable than money. It was a living museum of American farming heritage, a direct link to practices and principles that were quickly fading into history. What set the Henderson Farm apart wasn't just its methods or its history, it was the results. Through decades of careful soil management and crop rotation, the land produced yields that often surpassed those of its chemical-dependent neighbors. The farm's heritage vegetables and grains, grown from seeds passed down through generations, were sought after by high-end restaurants and discerning customers who understood the value of traditionally grown produce. As Marcus worked his land, each day he carried with him not just the physical tools of his trade, but the accumulated wisdom of 5 generations. Every decision he made was informed by both ancient knowledge and modern understanding, creating a unique blend of past and present that made the Henderson Farm special. He knew that what he preserved wasn't just a piece of land or a way of farming. It was a legacy that spoke to the very heart of American agricultural tradition. The dream that consumed Marcus's thoughts wasn't born from ambition or greed. It was rooted in a promise made to his dying father. The Henderson family had always possessed something extraordinary, a collection of agricultural artifacts and heirloom seeds that traced back to the earliest days of American farming. This treasury, carefully preserved in a hand-carved wooden box that had survived 5 generations, contained seeds from crops that no longer existed anywhere else in the world. The box itself was a masterpiece of craftsmanship created by Marcus's great-great-grandfather shortly after the Civil War. Its dark walnut surface bore intricate carvings of wheat stalks and corn husks, while brass hinges, tarnished by time, still moved with surprising smoothness. Inside, carefully organized compartments held glass vials of seeds, each labeled with flowing script that detailed their history and growing requirements. Alongside these were daguerreotypes of Henderson farmers past, yellowed documents proving the authenticity of each variety, and a leather-bound journal containing farming secrets passed down through generations. Marcus's father had always dreamed of having their family's collection recognized by the National Agricultural Heritage Registry, a prestigious institution that preserved America's farming history. But more than mere recognition, he wanted the world to understand the vital importance of maintaining genetic diversity in crops. These seeds represented varieties that had evolved to withstand droughts, diseases, and pests naturally without the need for modern chemical interventions. The opportunity to fulfill this dream had finally presented itself. The Smithfield Agricultural Auction House, the most prestigious in the country, was hosting a special heritage evaluation event. For the first time in decades, they were opening their doors to private collections, seeking to identify and catalogue historically significant agricultural artifacts. The most remarkable items would be featured in their upcoming American Agricultural Heritage exhibition, an event that drew attention from museums, historians, and agricultural institutions worldwide. But Marcus knew that getting through those doors wouldn't be easy. Smithfield had a reputation for catering exclusively to the elite of the farming world: corporate agricultural giants, wealthy collectors, and established institutions. They weren't known for welcoming small-time farmers, especially those who still worked their own land with their own hands. Every night, after finishing his daily chores, Marcus would sit at his kitchen table and carefully examine each item in the box. He studied the journal entries, cross-referenced the seed varieties with historical agricultural records, and meticulously documented the provenance of each artifact. He knew that to succeed, he needed to present not just a collection, but a compelling story of American agricultural history. The collection's centerpiece was a variety of wheat that his great-great-grandfather had developed during the devastating drought of 1874. While other farms had failed, this hardy strain had thrived, helping to feed not just the Henderson family, but many of their neighbors as well. The seed line had been carefully maintained through the generations, resistant to disease and capable of producing abundant yields without chemical fertilizers. Marcus understood that this collection represented more than just his family's history. It was a living testament to the ingenuity and resilience of American farmers who had worked the land before the age of industrial agriculture. In a world increasingly dominated by genetically modified crops and corporate farming, these seeds and artifacts were priceless pieces of agricultural heritage that needed to be preserved for future generations. As the date of the heritage evaluation approached, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. This wasn't just about fulfilling his father's dream or gaining recognition for his family's legacy. It was about ensuring that these invaluable genetic resources and historical artifacts would be properly documented and preserved, potentially providing solutions for future agricultural challenges in an increasingly unstable climate. The weeks leading up to the Smithfield evaluation demanded meticulous preparation. Marcus knew that presenting his family's legacy required more than just showing up with the wooden box. He needed to create a compelling case for its historical significance. Each evening, after tending to his crops and livestock, he devoted hours to organizing decades of documentation that would prove the collection's authenticity and importance. In his father's study, now thick with dust since his passing, Marcus discovered a treasure trove of additional records he hadn't known existed. Carefully preserved letters between his great-grandfather and the Department of Agriculture from 1902 detailed the unique properties of their wheat variety. The correspondence revealed how the Henderson strain had helped numerous farms survive. The Great Drought of 1904, when other wheat varieties had failed completely. Agricultural journals from the 1920s mentioned the Henderson Farm's exceptional drought-resistant corn strain, documenting its superior yields during the Dust Bowl era. The preparation went beyond mere paper documentation. Marcus spent countless hours cleaning and restoring each item in the collection. He carefully polished the brass fittings on the wooden box, being cautious not to disturb the patina that spoke of its age. Each glass vial was gently cleaned, their handwritten labels preserved beneath a protective coating. The leather-bound journal required particularly delicate handling. Its pages had become brittle with age, each one containing invaluable farming wisdom written in his ancestors' careful script. Dr. Sarah Thompson, an agricultural historian from the local university, initially approached the collection with academic skepticism. However, as she delved deeper into the Henderson family's agricultural achievements, her excitement grew palpable. "These aren't just old seeds," she had told Marcus, her eyes bright with scholarly enthusiasm. "This is a living time capsule of American agricultural innovation. The genetic diversity preserved here could be crucial for developing climate-resilient crops in the future." Working together, they began the painstaking process of authenticating every item. Each seed variety underwent genetic testing to confirm its unique characteristics. The results were astounding. Several varieties showed natural resistance to diseases that modern crops struggled against. The Henderson wheat, in particular, demonstrated remarkable drought tolerance while maintaining higher protein content than contemporary varieties. To prove the viability of the heirloom seeds, Marcus had dedicated a small plot of land to growing samples of each variety. He photographed their progress meticulously, documenting how these heritage strains performed compared to modern hybrid crops. The experimental plot became a living testament to his family's agricultural legacy, with plants displaying characteristics that had been bred out of modern varieties in favor of uniformity and machine harvesting compatibility. The financial burden of proper preparation was substantial. Professional photography of the collection, laboratory analysis of the seeds, and authentication of historical documents stretched his modest farming budget to its absolute limits. Marcus made the difficult decision to sell his prize bull, Old Thunder, to cover the mounting expenses. The animal had been his pride and joy, winning numerous county fair ribbons, but preserving his family's legacy took precedence over personal attachments. Each evening, Marcus meticulously documented the history of every seed variety, creating detailed profiles that included their development, unique characteristics, and historical significance. He worked with a professional photographer to capture high-resolution images of each item, ensuring every detail was preserved digitally. The photographer, initially treating it as just another job, became fascinated by the collection's historical significance and spent extra hours capturing the subtle details that told the Henderson family's story. The leather journal proved to be a particularly rich source of information. Beyond farming techniques, it contained observations about weather patterns, soil conditions, and crop responses that spanned over a century. These records, when compared with modern climate data, revealed valuable insights into agricultural adaptation to changing environmental conditions. Dr. Thompson helped Marcus cross-reference these observations with historical weather records, creating a compelling narrative about the resilience of heritage crop varieties. As the evaluation date approached, Marcus faced increasing skepticism from neighboring farmers. Many had already sold their family farms to corporations, choosing immediate profit over preservation of agricultural heritage. "You're living in the past," they'd say. "Modern agriculture is about efficiency and scale." But their doubt only strengthened his resolve. He understood that the value of his family's collection transcended monetary worth. It was a bridge between past and future agriculture, holding secrets that could prove vital in an era of climate change and diminishing crop diversity. The night before the evaluation, Marcus worked until dawn, ensuring every detail was perfect. He carefully wrapped each item in acid-free paper, securing them in the restored wooden box. The portfolio of documentation, bound in leather matching the journal's cover, contained the story of 5 generations of agricultural innovation and perseverance. Everything was ready, except for Marcus himself, who struggled with doubt about whether the prestigious Smithfield agricultural auction house would see the true value of what he was about to present. As he watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, he thought about his father's words. "Our seeds carry the wisdom of generations. They're not just our family's legacy, they're a gift to the future of farming." The morning of the Smithfield Agricultural Heritage Evaluation dawned crisp and clear. Marcus had barely slept, but adrenaline kept him sharp as he loaded the precious wooden box into his weathered pickup truck. The Smithfield auction house rarely opened its doors to private collections, but their announcement had sparked hope across the farming community. They were seeking historically significant agricultural artifacts for their upcoming American Agricultural Heritage Exhibition, an event that could change the trajectory of agricultural preservation forever. The prestigious evaluation was the result of growing concern about the loss of crop diversity in modern agriculture. Climate change and increasing crop failures had forced even the most traditional institutions to recognize the value of heritage varieties. The Smithfield Auction House, known for catering exclusively to corporate agriculture and wealthy collectors, had finally acknowledged the need to preserve agricultural history before it disappeared forever. As Marcus drove the 3 hours to Richmond, Virginia, where the evaluation was being held, he reflected on the significance of this opportunity. The Smithfield event wasn't just another agricultural show. It was the most prestigious gathering of its kind in the country. Agricultural historians, museum curators, and representatives from major seed banks would be present. Getting his family's collection recognized here could ensure its preservation for future generations. The invitation to the evaluation had arrived unexpectedly. Marcus remembered standing in his kitchen, covered in dirt from the fields, when he heard the radio announcement. The Smithfield Auction House was opening its doors to private collections for the first time in its 127-year history. They were specifically seeking artifacts that could demonstrate the evolution and innovation of American agriculture. Marcus had immediately known this was the opportunity his father had dreamed of. The requirements for submission had been daunting. Applicants needed to provide extensive documentation of their artifacts' historical significance, proof of authenticity, and evidence of their relevance to modern agriculture. Most importantly, collections needed to demonstrate unique contribution to American agricultural heritage. The Henderson collection met every criterion, but Marcus knew that getting past the initial screening would be challenging. The application process alone had been grueling. Marcus had spent weeks preparing the required documentation, working with Dr. Thompson to ensure every detail was perfect. The preliminary review committee had been impressed enough to grant him one of the coveted evaluation slots, but that was just the first hurdle. Today, he would face the main selection committee, a panel of experts known for their exacting standards and dismissive attitude toward small-scale farmers. As he drove, Marcus thought about the significance of timing. Climate change had begun to affect crop yields worldwide, and even corporate farms were struggling with increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. The Henderson seeds, developed and preserved through generations of careful selection, might hold crucial genetic traits for developing resilient crops. This wasn't just about preserving history, it was about securing the future of agriculture. The radio crackled with news about another failed harvest in the Midwest, where corporate farms were struggling with a new strain of wheat rust that had evolved resistance to modern fungicides. Marcus smiled grimly, knowing that the Henderson wheat variety had natural resistance to multiple forms of rust, a trait developed through generations of selective breeding. This was exactly why heritage varieties needed to be preserved. As Richmond's skyline appeared on the horizon, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He wasn't just representing his family today. He was representing every small farmer who had ever worked to improve their crops through careful observation and selective breeding. The Henderson collection was proof that traditional farming methods, combined with generational knowledge, could produce innovations that modern agriculture desperately needed. The morning traffic thinned as he turned onto the private road leading to the Smithfield auction house. The building itself was imposing, a restored Victorian mansion set amid manicured gardens. Luxury cars filled the parking lot, their polished surfaces reflecting the morning sun. Marcus's mud-splattered pickup truck stood out like a dandelion in a rose garden, but he held his head high as he carefully lifted the wooden box from the passenger seat. The security guard at the gate gave him a skeptical look when he presented his evaluation invitation, but the paperwork was in order. As Marcus walked toward the entrance, he could see other participants arriving, most in expensive suits, carrying sleek presentation portfolios. He adjusted his clean but worn jacket, remembering his father's words, "It's not the clothes that make the farmer, it's the wisdom in his hands and the love for his land." The Smithfield auction house's grand entrance hall felt like stepping into another world. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, polished to a mirror shine. The air was heavily perfumed with expensive floral arrangements that adorned antique pedestals. For Marcus, whose world was defined by the honest scent of soil and growing things, this artificial perfection felt suffocating. Well-dressed attendees moved through the space with practiced ease, their designer suits and leather briefcases marking them as regular participants in this rarefied world. Conversations in cultured tones drifted through the air, discussing market futures and agricultural investment portfolios. These were people who saw farming as spreadsheets and profit margins, not as the living, breathing entity Marcus knew it to be. At the registration desk, a young woman in a tailored blazer barely glanced up from her tablet as Marcus approached. Her manicured fingers hovered over the screen as she asked for his name, her slight frown deepening when he gave it. "Henderson?" "Ah, yes, the private submission." Her tone carried the same dismissiveness Marcus had encountered throughout his Life when dealing with the agricultural elite. She gestured vaguely toward a side hallway. Evaluations for independent entries are being conducted in the East Wing. The East Wing, as it turned out, was clearly designated for what the Smithfield considered lesser participants. While the main hall boasted premium exhibition spaces and comfortable seating areas, this section had the distinct feel of an afterthought. Folding chairs lined the walls, and the lighting was noticeably dimmer. Other small-scale farmers and collectors sat quietly, clutching their precious items, while corporate representatives breezed past without a glance. Marcus found himself seated between an elderly woman cradling a collection of antique corn-husking tools and a middle-aged man with what appeared to be historical irrigation plans. They exchanged knowing looks, all of them understanding their position as outsiders in this temple of agricultural commerce. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, whispered that she'd been trying to get her family's collection evaluated for 3 years. "They keep finding reasons to delay," she confided, her weathered hands trembling slightly. The contrast between the two worlds became even starker as corporate presentations began in the main hall. Through the open doors, Marcus could see elaborate digital displays and professional speakers discussing agricultural futures and genetic modification technology. Their polished presentations spoke of efficiency, scale, and profit, with no mention of the soul of farming, the connection to the land that had sustained families for generations. A group of executives from AgriCorp, one of the largest agricultural conglomerates in the country, swept past the East Wing entrance. Their leader, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, paused briefly to glance at the waiting small-scale farmers with unconcealed disdain. "I wasn't aware Smithfield was running a country fair," he remarked to his colleagues, loud enough to be heard, generating polite laughter from his entourage. The comment stung, but Marcus remained focused on his purpose. He opened the wooden box slightly, checking that everything remained in perfect order. The seeds his ancestors had preserved with such care seemed to hold more authenticity than all the corporate presentations combined. Each variety told a story of adaptation, survival, and the deep understanding that came from generations of careful observation. The waiting area slowly filled with more independent presenters, each carrying pieces of agricultural history that the corporate world had forgotten or dismissed. A young woman clutched a binder full of her grandmother's hand-drawn maps showing historical crop rotation patterns. An elderly man had brought carefully preserved records of traditional Native American farming techniques that had kept his community fed through countless droughts. The physical environment reflected the stark divide between the two agricultural worlds. The main hall's temperature was perfectly controlled, while the East Wing felt uncomfortably warm. Corporate presenters had access to refreshment stations and comfortable lounges, while the independent presenters shared a single water cooler. Even the staff's behavior changed as they crossed from one section to the other, professional courtesy giving way to barely concealed impatience. As the morning wore on, Marcus observed the steady stream of dark suits and designer dresses flowing through the main hall. These people spoke a different language, one of shareholders, market penetration, and genetic patents. Their world was as far removed from the reality of daily farming as their polished shoes were from the soil they claimed to understand. Yet they were the ones who increasingly controlled the future of agriculture, making decisions that affected every small farmer in the country. The weight of the Henderson collection seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. In this environment of corporate agriculture and technological solutions, would anyone understand the true value of what he carried? The seeds in his wooden box represented not just history, but a different way of thinking about farming. One that understood the delicate balance between human needs and natural systems. As Marcus waited for his turn to present, He couldn't help but wonder if this clash of worlds would ultimately determine not just the fate of his family's legacy, but the future of farming itself. When Marcus's name was finally called, he was directed to Evaluation Room C, notably smaller and less impressive than the main exhibition spaces. The evaluator, Victoria Blackwood, sat behind a mahogany desk, her posture rigid and unwelcoming. Her reputation preceded her. She was known for being one of Smithfield's most stringent judges, with a particular disdain for what she called amateur collections. The room's sterile atmosphere felt oppressive, its white walls bare, except for framed certificates declaring Smithfield's various accreditations in agricultural authentication. "Mr. Henderson," she began, not bothering to look up from her tablet, "I see you're here with—" She paused, her lip curling slightly. "A family seed collection." Her tone suggested she'd already made her assessment before seeing a single item. Behind her, through floor-to-ceiling windows, corporate logos of major agricultural companies loomed on neighboring buildings, a constant reminder of the powers that dominated modern farming. Marcus carefully placed the wooden box on the desk, its weathered surface a stark contrast to the polished mahogany. Victoria's eyes narrowed at the sight of what she clearly considered a rustic intrusion into her pristine domain. "We generally deal with properly preserved specimens," she remarked, eyeing the box with suspicion. "Professional collections maintained under laboratory conditions." The air in the room grew heavier as Victoria began her interrogation. Each question felt like a carefully aimed dart, designed to puncture any credibility Marcus might have brought with him. "Do you have any concept of proper preservation protocols?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "These seeds should be stored in climate-controlled environments, not wooden boxes, regardless of their sentimental value." As Marcus began explaining the collection's significance, Victoria interrupted repeatedly, her dismissive gestures becoming more pronounced with each attempt. She questioned everything. The authenticity of century-old Department of Agriculture letters, Dr. Thompson's academic endorsement, which she dismissed as provincial, and especially the handwritten journal entries that documented generations of agricultural innovation. "Mr. Henderson," she said, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses with manicured fingers, "you need to understand that Smithfield maintains certain standards. We can't simply accept every farmer's collection of old seeds and homegrown documentation." Her eyes flickered to the expensive watch on her wrist, a not-so-subtle hint that she considered this evaluation a waste of her valuable time. The conversation grew increasingly tense as Victoria scrutinized each document Marcus presented. Her questions became more pointed, clearly designed to expose what she presumed would be gaps in his knowledge. "These genetic testing results," she said, barely glancing at the papers, "were conducted by a local university lab. We only accept analysis from internationally accredited institutions." She made a show of organizing papers on her desk, suggesting the evaluation was already concluding. The dismissal in her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Modern agribusiness has developed scientifically engineered strains far superior to any heritage varieties. These corporate varieties undergo rigorous testing and development. They're the future of agriculture, not some seeds kept in an old box." Her words carried the weight of institutional prejudice, the kind that had been slowly erasing traditional farming knowledge in favor of corporate agriculture. Victoria's assistant, a young man in an equally pristine suit, entered with a stack of papers requiring her signature. She used this interruption to further emphasize the gap between their worlds. "As you can see, Mr. Henderson, we're quite busy with serious agricultural matters. Perhaps you should consider donating your items to a local historical society or a county museum, somewhere more appropriate for this level of collection." The systematic dismantling of his family's legacy continued as Victoria picked apart each aspect of the collection. She questioned the viability of the seeds, disputed the historical significance of the documentation, and openly mocked the idea that traditional farming methods could have any relevance in the modern agricultural landscape. Her words were carefully chosen weapons, each designed to diminish the value of generations of agricultural knowledge. The evaluation had barely lasted 15 minutes, but Victoria had managed to question not just the collection's validity, but generations of Henderson farming wisdom. Her final words drove home the depth of her prejudice. Smithfield deals with the future of agriculture, Mr. Henderson, not its past. We're interested in innovation, not nostalgia. And frankly, she added, closing her leather portfolio with a decisive snap, I don't see anything innovative about old seeds in a wooden box. Throughout the encounter, Marcus maintained his composure, though inside he felt a growing determination. Each dismissive comment and condescending glance only strengthened his resolve to prove the true value of his family's legacy. Victoria Blackwood represented everything that threatened to erase generations of agricultural knowledge. The corporate mindset that valued patents over heritage, profits over preservation, and artificial progress over time-tested wisdom. Marcus left Evaluation Room C. He encountered a scene that made his blood boil. In the main hall, Victoria Blackwood was now warmly greeting representatives from AgriCorp, one of the largest agricultural conglomerates in the country. The contrast in her demeanor was striking. Gone was the cold dismissiveness, replaced by an almost fawning attitude towards the corporate executives. The AgriCorp team was presenting their latest genetically modified wheat strain, developed in sterile laboratories without any connection to actual farming conditions. Their sleek presentation, displayed on massive screens, showed graphs and charts celebrating increased yields, but made no mention of the strain's dependence on chemical fertilizers and pesticides, or its inability to reproduce naturally. Marcus stood in the doorway, clutching his wooden box, as Victoria lavished praise on AgriCorp's innovative approach to agricultural advancement. The corporate team's leader, Richard Sterling, delivered practiced soundbites about feeding the world and revolutionary farming technologies. Each word felt like a direct attack on everything the Henderson collection represented. The presentation turned particularly galling when Sterling began discussing drought resistance. Our patented genetic modifications represent the only viable solution to climate change challenges, he declared confidently. Victoria nodded enthusiastically, apparently forgetting that just moments ago she had dismissed the Henderson wheat's natural drought resistance as irrelevant. Unable to remain silent, Marcus stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady. "Despite his racing heart, but what about heritage strains that have already proven their resilience?" The room fell silent. Victoria's face darkened with embarrassment and anger, while Sterling regarded Marcus with the kind of look one might give an insect that had wandered into a clean room. "This is a private presentation, Mr. Henderson," Victoria said sharply. "I believe we've concluded your evaluation." But Marcus stood his ground, opening his wooden box. The contrast between his weathered container and AgriCorp's sleek display cases couldn't have been more stark. "Our wheat variety survived the drought of 1874, Marcus continued, pulling out a glass vial of seeds. "It adapted naturally, without genetic modification or chemical dependencies. We've maintained its viability for over 140 years. The corporate executives exchanged uncomfortable glances as Marcus spoke about his family's legacy. Sterling attempted to dismiss Marcus's claims with corporate polish. "While historical varieties are interesting," he said with a condescending smile, "modern agriculture requires scientifically validated solutions. We can't rely on folk wisdom in today's world." The word folk dripped with disdain. Victoria tried to intervene, clearly mortified by this disruption of her carefully orchestrated corporate presentation. "Mr. Henderson, this is highly inappropriate. Security will escort you out if necessary." But something unexpected happened. Several of the younger agricultural scientists in the room had moved closer, showing genuine interest in the Henderson seeds. One of them, Dr. James Chen, spoke up. "Actually, heritage strains like this could be incredibly valuable. Natural drought resistance developed over generations of selective breeding might offer insights our lab work hasn't uncovered." Victoria shot him a warning look, but he continued. "We've been so focused on genetic modification that we've overlooked the adaptive capabilities already present in heritage varieties." The tension in the room became palpable. Sterling's polished facade cracked slightly as he realized he was losing control of the narrative. "We're not here to discuss outdated farming methods," he said firmly. "AgriCorp's research represents the cutting edge of agricultural science." Marcus seized the moment to reveal more from his collection. He carefully laid out the documented evidence of his wheat's performance during historical droughts, its natural resistance to multiple forms of rust, and its ability to thrive without chemical inputs. The younger scientists gathered around, their professional curiosity overtaking corporate loyalty. Victoria watched in horror as her carefully maintained hierarchy crumbled. The distinction between corporate agriculture and heritage farming was blurring, and with it, her justification for dismissing Marcus's collection. Sterling attempted to redirect attention to his presentation, but the genuine interest in the Henderson seeds had disrupted the carefully choreographed corporate show. The conflict had evolved beyond a simple evaluation. It had become a battle between two fundamentally different approaches to agriculture. On one side stood the corporate giants with their patents and profit margins. On the other, generations of farming wisdom contained in a humble wooden box. The very presence of the Henderson collection challenged the narrative that corporate agriculture was the only path forward. The situation reached its boiling point when Richard Sterling, the AgriCorp executive, decided to directly challenge Marcus's credibility. The main hall had become an impromptu battlefield, with the corporate agricultural world facing off against generations of farming wisdom. Sterling stepped forward, his expensive suit a stark contrast to Marcus's worn work clothes. "Let's be clear about something," Sterling announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of corporate power. "While Mr. Henderson's collection might have some quaint historical value, it has no place in modern agriculture. Our genetically modified strains are the product of millions of dollars in research, rigorous scientific testing, and state-of-the-art technology." The growing crowd of onlookers had formed a circle around them. Victoria Blackwood stood nervously to the side, her carefully orchestrated corporate presentation having devolved into an unprecedented confrontation. The younger scientists, who had shown interest in Marcus's seeds, watched intently, while other corporate representatives muttered among themselves. Sterling continued his attack, pulling up digital displays of AgriCorp's latest yield data. "Our modified wheat produces 40% more grain per acre than any heritage variety. It's resistant to our proprietary herbicides, and the genetic modifications ensure uniform growth for mechanical harvesting. This is what modern farming looks like." Marcus stood his ground, the wooden box still open before him. "And how many chemicals does your wheat require?" he asked calmly. "How many farmers have gone bankrupt trying to pay for your patented seeds and matching herbicides? Our wheat has fed families for generations without destroying the soil or driving farmers into debt." Sterling's face reddened slightly. "The costs reflect the investment in development. You can't expect cutting-edge agricultural technology to be free." He gestured dismissively at Marcus's collection. "Those seeds represent the past, a past we've moved beyond for good reason." The confrontation escalated when Sterling reached for one of the glass vials containing the Henderson wheat seeds. "Let's see this miracle wheat of yours," he said condescendingly. But Marcus quickly closed the box, protecting his family's legacy from Sterling's grasp. "Those seeds aren't yours to handle," Marcus said firmly. "Unlike your patented strains, these varieties belong to the heritage of American farming. They represent generations of agricultural knowledge that your company is trying to erase." Victoria attempted to intervene, clearly panicked about losing control of her prestigious event. "This is highly irregular. Mr. Henderson, you were asked to leave after your evaluation. This disruption is unacceptable." But Dr. Chen, the young scientist who had shown interest earlier, spoke up again. "Actually, I think this discussion is exactly what we need. We've become so focused on genetic modification that we've forgotten about natural adaptation and resilience. The Henderson collection might hold genetic traits we've lost in modern varieties." Sterling's corporate mask slipped. "Further, are you suggesting we abandon scientific progress in favor of outdated farming methods? These heritage varieties can't match our yields, our uniformity, our control over the growing process." "Control?" Marcus questioned. "Is that what you call requiring farmers to buy new seeds every year because yours are engineered to be sterile? Is that what you call making crops dependent on chemical cocktails that destroy soil biology?" The confrontation had drawn even more attention. Other small-scale farmers and collectors from the East Wing had gathered, watching the clash between corporate agriculture and traditional farming wisdom. Sterling tried to reassert control over the situation. "This is ridiculous," he declared. "We're here to discuss the future of agriculture, not waste time on obsolete methods. Mr. Henderson, your emotional attachment to these seeds is clouding your judgment about modern agricultural realities." The tension in the room reached a fever pitch. Marcus opened his box one more time, but instead of seeds, he pulled out the leather-bound journal containing generations of agricultural observations and wisdom. "You talk about scientific data," he said, his voice steady. "Here are 140 years of documented observations about soil health, weather patterns, and crop adaptation. Real-world data that your laboratory tests can't replicate." Sterling scoffed, but some of his corporate team members showed genuine interest. The divide in the room was palpable, between those who saw agriculture as a corporate endeavor and those who understood it as a living heritage. The confrontation had become more than a clash between two men. It was a battle for the very soul of American farming. As the confrontation in the main hall reached its climax, Marcus noticed something peculiar happening. Dr. Chen and several of the young scientists had begun whispering excitedly among themselves, pointing at their tablets and phones. Their behavior suggested they had discovered something significant, something that could change the entire dynamic of this clash. Victoria Blackwood, still trying to maintain control of the situation, hadn't noticed that her assistant was urgently trying to get her attention. The young man's face showed a mix of anxiety and amazement as he repeatedly glanced between his tablet and Marcus's wooden box. Meanwhile, Sterling continued his corporate monologue about Agricorp's superiority, unaware that the attention of his audience was shifting. Dr. Chen had pulled up historical agricultural records on his tablet, his eyes widening as he cross-referenced something with the Henderson documentation. He whispered intensely with his colleagues, their excitement becoming more visible with each passing moment. One of them hurriedly made a phone call, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. The atmosphere in the room began to shift subtly. The corporate representatives' confident smirks were replaced by uncertain glances. Even Sterling, mid-speech about Agricorp's latest patents, noticed that something was amiss. Victoria's assistant had finally gotten her attention, showing her something on his tablet that made her complexion pale considerably. Marcus stood quietly, still holding his family's journal. He noticed an increasing number of people in the room looking at their devices, then at his wooden box, then back at their screens. The whispers grew louder and fragments of conversations became audible. Cannot be coincidental. Check. The dates again. Impossible odds. Sterling, sensing the change in the room, attempted to regain control. If we could return to the presentation. But his words lacked their previous authority. Victoria had stepped away to make an urgent phone call, her usual composure noticeably shaken. More people were entering the hall, drawn by whatever information was spreading through the crowd. Dr. Chen approached Marcus, his tablet clutched tightly. "Mr. Henderson," he began, his voice trembling slightly with excitement, "we need to verify something about your family's wheat variety. The documentation you provided, particularly the entries from 1874. He paused, looking at his colleagues for confirmation. "There's something extraordinary here." The wooden box, which had seemed so out of place in this modern setting, now drew everyone's attention. The very items that Victoria had dismissed as amateur and Sterling had mocked as obsolete were suddenly the center of intense scientific interest. Marcus could sense that something momentous was about to unfold. Victoria returned from her phone call, her expression completely transformed. She whispered something to Sterling that made him step back, his corporate confidence visibly shaken. The crowd had grown larger, with more scientists and agricultural experts arriving, many of them already engrossed in intense discussions about whatever had been discovered. Marcus's father had always said that truth, like a seed, needed the right moment to sprout. As he watched the scene unfold around him, he realized that moment had arrived. The Henderson legacy, preserved through generations in that humble wooden box, was about to reveal its true significance in a way that would shake the foundations of modern agriculture. The whispers and excitement continued to build. Someone from the National Agricultural Research Center had arrived, moving quickly through the crowd toward Marcus. Victoria's assistant was printing documents frantically, while Dr. Chen and his colleagues huddled around their data verification. Complete, ready to announce whatever they had discovered, Sterling made one last attempt to dismiss the situation, but his words fell flat in the charged atmosphere. The corporate narrative that had dominated the day was crumbling in the face of whatever revelation was about to emerge. Marcus stood calmly, knowing that generations of Henderson farmers had prepared for this moment, even if they hadn't known exactly what form it would take. The stage was set for a revelation that would transform not just this evaluation, but potentially the future of agriculture itself. The humble wooden box that had been dismissed and mocked now held everyone's attention, about to prove that sometimes the greatest innovations come not from corporate laboratories, but from generations of careful observation and dedication to the land. Dr. Chen stepped forward, his tablet displaying historical agricultural records alongside the Henderson documentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent hall, "what we've discovered is extraordinary. The Henderson wheat variety, developed in 1874, contains a naturally occurring genetic mutation that we've been trying to artificially recreate for the past decade." The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd. Dr. Chen continued, pulling up detailed genetic analyses on the main display screens. This particular strain carries a unique combination of genes that provide natural resistance to multiple forms of fungal diseases, extreme temperature variations, and most importantly, drought conditions. What's remarkable is that these traits have remained stable for over 140 years of careful cultivation. Victoria Blackwood, who had dismissed the collection hours earlier, now stood transfixed as more data appeared on the screens. The newly arrived representative from the National Agricultural Research Center, Dr. Sarah Martinez, stepped forward to confirm the findings. The genetic profile of the Henderson wheat is unprecedented. It demonstrates natural adaptations that our most advanced genetic engineering hasn't been able to replicate. Sterling attempted to interject, but Dr. Martinez continued. What makes this discovery particularly significant is the timing. Our latest climate models predict severe challenges for current wheat varieties within the next decade. The Henderson strain could be crucial for developing resilient crops capable of withstanding these changes. The corporate representatives watched in stunned silence as more scientists presented their rapid analyses. The Henderson wheat had not only survived historical droughts, but had actually improved its resilience through generations of careful selection. The documented growing methods in the family journal revealed sophisticated understanding of soil biology and plant genetics that predated modern scientific discoveries. The most remarkable aspect, Dr. Chen explained, is that this variety achieves higher protein content and better yield stability than our modern strains, without requiring chemical inputs. The Henderson family's methods of seed selection and cultivation have preserved and enhanced traits that we've accidentally bred out of commercial varieties. Marcus stood quietly as his family's legacy was validated before the agricultural elite. The wooden box, so recently dismissed as worthless, now represented one of the most significant agricultural discoveries of the decade. Victoria's assistant had compiled reports showing that the Henderson wheat's genetic profile matched exactly what major research institutions worldwide had been trying to develop through genetic engineering. The implications were staggering. The Henderson collection wasn't just historically significant, it was potentially the key to future food security. The careful documentation in the family journal provided insights into cultivation methods that modern agriculture had forgotten. In its rush toward industrialization, Dr. Martinez addressed the crowd again. What we're seeing here isn't just about one wheat variety. The Henderson collection represents a living library of agricultural adaptations. The methods documented in their journal, combined with the preserved seed varieties, could revolutionize our approach to crop resilience. Sterling's corporate mask finally cracked completely as the evidence mounted. Agricorp's genetically modified strains, dependent on chemical inputs and patented growing methods, suddenly seemed primitive compared to the sophisticated natural adaptations preserved in the Henderson seeds. The revelation extended beyond just the wheat. As scientists examined the other varieties in the collection, they discovered similar patterns of natural resistance and adaptation. Each seed told a story of agricultural innovation achieved through generations of careful observation and selection rather than laboratory manipulation. The wooden box that had seemed so out of place in Smithfield's prestigious halls now stood as a testament to the wisdom of traditional farming methods. The very practices that corporate agriculture had dismissed as outdated were proven to be sophisticated systems of agricultural knowledge, developed through generations of practical experience and careful observation. The aftermath of the revelation transformed not just the Smithfield Agricultural Auction House, but the entire landscape of agricultural preservation. Victoria Blackwood, who had dismissed Marcus hours earlier, approached him with visible humility. "Mr. Henderson," she began, her earlier condescension replaced by genuine respect, "I owe you a profound apology. We've clearly failed to understand the true value of heritage agriculture. The main hall, once dominated by corporate presentations, had become a hub of scientific excitement. Researchers from various institutions crowded around Marcus's wooden box, examining each seed variety with newfound appreciation. The corporate representatives, including Sterling, had retreated to the corners, their polished PowerPoints forgotten in the wake of this agricultural revelation. Dr. Martinez from the National Agricultural Research Center took center stage. The Henderson Collection represents a turning point in our understanding of crop resilience, she announced. We're establishing a dedicated research program to study these heritage varieties, with Mr. Henderson as lead consultant. This position comes with full funding and resources to continue his family's work. The ripple effect spread quickly through the agricultural community. News outlets began arriving, eager to cover the story of how a family farm's heritage had upended modern assumptions about agricultural innovation. Social media exploded with discussions about the importance of preserving traditional farming knowledge. Victoria mobilized Smithfield's full resources to properly document and authenticate the Henderson Collection. The same meticulous attention previously reserved for corporate clients was now focused on understanding the agricultural wisdom contained in that wooden box. She announced the creation of a new heritage agriculture division with the Henderson Collection as its cornerstone. The transformation extended beyond the immediate revelation. Other small-scale farmers and collectors who had been relegated to the East Wing were invited into the main hall. Their collections, previously dismissed as insignificant, were being re-evaluated with new appreciation. Each artifact and seed variety now held potential significance in the fight against climate change and food insecurity. Sterling and Agricorp faced a reckoning. Their shareholders demanded explanations for why billions spent on genetic engineering had failed to achieve what generations of traditional farming had accomplished naturally. The company's stock price fluctuated as investors questioned their research priorities and reliance on chemical-dependent crop varieties. Dr. Chen and his team of young scientists established a groundbreaking collaborative program between research institutions and heritage farms. We need to bridge the gap between traditional wisdom and modern science, he explained. The Henderson Collection proves that progress doesn't always mean abandoning the past. The Smithfield auction house underwent a complete philosophical transformation. Victoria announced the establishment of the Henderson Heritage Fund, a multi-million-dollar initiative dedicated to identifying and preserving valuable agricultural collections worldwide. The fund would provide resources for small farmers to document and maintain their heritage varieties. Marcus found himself at the center of a new movement in agricultural preservation. Universities requested his expertise for their agricultural programs. Conservation organizations sought his advice on preserving genetic diversity. The wooden box that had seemed so out of place in the morning now held a position of honor in Smithfield's main exhibition hall. The resolution brought personal validation as well. Marcus's father's dream of having their family's legacy recognized had been fulfilled beyond imagination. The Henderson Collection would now benefit not just their local farming community, but agriculture worldwide. The careful documentation in the family journal would guide future generations in sustainable farming practices. International agricultural organizations began reaching out. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization expressed interest in studying the Henderson wheat's drought-resistant properties for developing regions. Climate scientists saw potential in the collection's naturally adapted varieties for addressing future environmental challenges. As the day drew to a close, Victoria made one final announcement that symbolized the complete shift in agricultural priorities. Smithfield would be renovating its entire facility, transforming the segregated East Wing into a dedicated heritage agriculture research center. The corporate world had been forced to acknowledge that true agricultural innovation required a balance between traditional wisdom and modern science. The wooden box that had been sneered at hours earlier now represented hope for the future of farming. It stood as proof that sometimes the most valuable innovations come not from corporate laboratories, but from generations of farmers working in harmony with the land, preserving and improving nature's own solutions to agricultural challenges. The transformation that occurred at the Smithfield Agricultural Auction House reverberated through the agricultural world long after that pivotal day. The Henderson collection became a symbol of how traditional farming wisdom could offer solutions to modern agricultural challenges. What began as a simple evaluation had evolved into a watershed moment for heritage agriculture. National and international media covered the story extensively. "Family Farm Legacy Revolutionizes Modern Agriculture" read headlines across the globe. The narrative resonated deeply. A humble farmer with a wooden box of seeds had challenged and transformed the corporate agricultural establishment's understanding of innovation and progress. Universities began incorporating the Henderson farming methods into their agricultural curricula. Dr. Chen led the development of a new program called Heritage Innovation in Modern Agriculture, which combined traditional farming wisdom with contemporary scientific understanding. Students learned how generations of careful observation and selection could achieve what billions in corporate research had failed to accomplish. The Smithfield Heritage Agriculture Division, under Victoria's leadership, became a global center for agricultural preservation. The Henderson collection served as its cornerstone, but the division grew to include heritage varieties from farming families worldwide. The East Wing, once a symbol of discrimination, was transformed into a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to studying and preserving traditional agricultural knowledge. AgriCorp and other agricultural corporations were forced to re-evaluate their approach. The revelation of the Henderson wheat's superior qualities led to a shift in research priorities. Instead of focusing solely on genetic modification, companies began exploring natural adaptation and traditional breeding methods. Sterling, in an ironic twist, was assigned to head AgriCorp's new Heritage Integration Department. The impact extended beyond the agricultural sector. The Henderson story sparked a broader conversation about the value of traditional knowledge in solving modern problems. Environmental organizations cited it as evidence that solutions to climate change might be found in preserved wisdom rather than newly developed technology. Marcus established the Henderson Institute for Agricultural Heritage, dedicated to bridging the gap between traditional farming methods and modern challenges. The Institute provided resources and support for small farmers maintaining heritage varieties, ensuring that other valuable agricultural legacies wouldn't be lost to time. The wooden box that had once been dismissed as worthless now sat in a custom-designed display case in the Smithfield main hall. It served as a reminder that true value isn't always found in sleek packaging or corporate boardrooms. Sometimes, the most precious innovations are preserved in humble containers, passed down through generations of careful stewards. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the next generation of farmers and agricultural scientists. Young people were inspired by the Henderson story, learning that innovation doesn't always mean abandoning tradition. The false dichotomy between old and new farming methods was replaced by an understanding that true progress often comes from building upon accumulated wisdom. The world of agriculture had been transformed. Corporate dominance gave way to a more balanced approach that valued both scientific advancement and traditional knowledge. The Henderson legacy proved that solutions to modern agricultural challenges might already exist, preserved by generations of farmers who understood the delicate balance between human needs and natural systems. As Marcus drove home that evening, watching the sun set over his family's fields, he knew that his father would have been proud. The Henderson collection had done more than gain recognition. It had helped reshape humanity's understanding of agricultural innovation and the importance of preserving farming heritage for future generations. The story of the simple wooden box that changed modern agriculture became legend, reminding everyone that sometimes the most valuable treasures are found not in corporate vaults or laboratory freezers, but in the carefully preserved legacies of those who worked the land with wisdom, patience, and respect. The story of Marcus Henderson and his family's legacy transformed the landscape of modern agriculture in ways that continued to ripple outward years after that fateful day at Smithfield. The humble wooden box that had been dismissed as worthless became a symbol of agricultural revolution, proving that sometimes the most profound innovations are preserved through generations of careful stewardship. A decade later, the Henderson collection's impact is evident across the global agricultural landscape. The naturally drought-resistant wheat varieties have become cornerstone genetics in developing climate-resilient crops, helping farmers adapt to increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. Research institutions worldwide have integrated these heritage strains into their breeding programs, creating a new generation of crops that combine traditional resilience with modern yields. Victoria Blackwood's transformation from skeptic to champion of heritage agriculture exemplifies the broader shift in institutional thinking. The Smithfield Heritage Agriculture Division, under her leadership, has facilitated the preservation of over 1,000 heritage varieties from farming families across 6 continents. What began as a single wooden box has grown into a global movement for agricultural preservation and innovation. Dr. Chen's research program revealed that many traits agricultural corporations spent billions trying to engineer were already present in heritage varieties, preserved through generations of careful cultivation. This discovery fundamentally altered the trajectory of agricultural research, shifting focus from genetic modification to understanding and enhancing naturally evolved traits. The program has trained hundreds of young scientists who now approach agricultural challenges with a deep respect for traditional farming wisdom. The Henderson Institute for Agricultural Heritage, established on the family's original farmland, has become a living laboratory where traditional knowledge and modern science work in harmony. Farmers from around the world come to learn how ancient wisdom can address contemporary challenges. The Institute's seed bank now houses over 5,000 heritage varieties, each with potential solutions to future agricultural challenges. Marcus himself has become a bridge between worlds, teaching new generations about the importance of preserving agricultural heritage while embracing scientific advancement. The farm that once seemed threatened by corporate agriculture now leads innovation in sustainable farming practices. Under his guidance, the Institute has developed farming methods that combine traditional wisdom with modern efficiency, achieving yields that rival industrial agriculture while maintaining soil health and biodiversity. The impact extends beyond agriculture into broader scientific understanding. The Henderson collection demonstrated how generations of careful observation and selection could achieve what laboratory engineering struggled to replicate. This revelation has influenced approaches to problems in fields ranging from medicine to environmental conservation, highlighting the value of preserved traditional knowledge. The wooden box still occupies its place of honor at Smithfield, but its influence reaches far beyond those hallowed halls. It has become a symbol of how true innovation often lies not in dismissing the past, but in understanding and building upon accumulated wisdom. The Henderson legacy proved that progress doesn't always mean abandoning tradition. Sometimes it means recognizing that our ancestors understood more than we gave them credit for. Perhaps most profoundly, the Henderson story changed how we think about value and innovation. In a world obsessed with the new and shiny, It reminded us that sometimes the most precious solutions are preserved in humble containers, passed down through generations of those who understood that farming isn't just about cultivation. It's about being stewards of knowledge that could prove crucial for humanity's future. As climate change presents unprecedented challenges to global agriculture, the wisdom preserved in heritage collections like the Hendersons becomes increasingly vital. The story of a simple farmer with a wooden box who transformed modern agriculture continues to inspire new generations to look to the past for solutions to future challenges, reminding us that true progress often comes from honoring and building upon the wisdom of those who came before.